Gotham Knights from 2022 is a fascinating case of how to make and market a game. That's because I don't think I've ever seen a case of the hype for a video game going from really high to completely deflated upon release quite like this. This game was revealed at the DC Fandom event in 2020. With where most people were at in their lives back in 2020, anything would look fun. But Gotham Knights, upon announcement, genuinely seemed like it was going to be a really good game. The premise was that Batman was dead, and in the game you have to play as Nightwing, Batgirl, Robin, and Red Hood to solve Batman's last case, exposing the Court of Owls and how they control Gotham City. That premise was interesting, and a lot of people were excited for the game as a result. It was being developed by Warner Bros. Montreal, who had done Batman Arkham Origins in 2013. At the time, people didn't like that game, but time has also been incredibly kind to it because at its core, it's a solid and fun game. The Arkham series just set such a high bar for Batman gameplay that people naturally assume that, even though this was not a game in the Arkham series, it would still be very similar to those games because the studio has made an Arkham game before, and because that's basically where the bar is set for Batman action games now. The game was set for a release in 2021, but was delayed to 2022, and in that process, I saw the hype for this game completely dissipate. That was because the gameplay we saw just looked off. The gameplay made it clear that this game wasn't just not an Arkham game, it was not an Arkham game. That is a subtle but very important difference. The focus of Gotham Knights' gameplay revolved around stats and builds and crafting and co-op gameplay. So I started losing interest from that moment forward because it just didn't look as fast-paced or as fun as any Arkham game. Controversy continued striking this game because it was planned to be released on current-gen consoles but also last-gen consoles too, which often means that developers have to make compromises on the visuals compared to other games that are exclusive to the new consoles. The last-gen versions of Gotham Knights would end up being cancelled, but that didn't fix the issue because the game didn't look very next-gen. In fact, it paled in comparison to the visuals of Batman Arkham Knight from 2015. Plus, on the consoles, it was capped at 30 frames per second despite how much power the PS5 and Xbox Series X have, especially when it comes to a game that doesn't look particularly amazing anyway. When it launched, like Arkham Origins before it, it was hit by a wave of criticism for being very buggy and unpolished prior to a patch that attempted to stabilize the game. As a passive observer, it just looked like a more low-budget release, and it just felt like nobody really cared about it anymore by the time it actually released. The scores were all mixed from the major gaming outlets too. I didn't pick it up or play it when it came out because of all these reasons. I got it on sale on Steam a few months back and decided to cover it alongside the Arkham games. Despite everything, I went in with an open mind because I like enjoying games and I feel like a game starring Batman's sidekicks could be really fun, so maybe I'd like it. Well, you read the title of the video, so let's just dive in. Gotham Knights does not play anything like the Arkham games. There exist a lot of Arkham clones out there in the market. When developers strike gold, imitators are quick to follow. So if any game had a free pass to be an Arkham clone without being a part of that series, it was Gotham Knights, and this game is just not. I get that you want to do something different and unique when you have the chance, but the combat in Gotham Knights is nothing like Arkham, and it is significantly worse. The Arkham combat system was incredibly simple. You attacked with one button, counterattack with another, and use gadgets whenever useful with their respective button combos. I talked about simplicity being its strength back in the Arkham Asylum video, and that remained true even as the mechanics got more sophisticated with each game. In Gotham Knights, you have an attack button, and if you lightly press it, you do a light attack, and if you hold it, you do heavy attacks. The same for ranged options in the triangle button. You evade with circle, and if you time it right, you can evade while remaining close to the enemy, making counterattacks easy. This is also a simple combat system, but it is too simple. Arkham had an elegant balance of attacking and counterattacking to keep your combo up, which allowed you to go faster with your strikes, creating a need for skillful play and endless replay value. Without that, you're just left with combat mechanics that are really slow and not that fun to play. The combat highlights how, despite being given a choice of 4 characters, they all feel really samey because you aren't doing much besides mashing buttons. Part of why Gotham Knights combat is so dry to play from start to finish is because this isn't really a game designed around skill. It's one of those games obsessed with stats. You open the inventory and are bombarded with a metric ton of options and stats, like different weapons with competing stats and elemental effects, costumes with differing stats and damage outputs, and a bunch of materials you collect that you can use to craft mods that further boost your stats. However, I didn't even bother with changing my costumes for the most part. From day one, I thought the designs of Batgirl and Robin, and somewhat Nightwing, looked really over-designed in this game, so I got the DLC for classic comic book costumes and stuck to those for the entire game, because they just look a lot simpler and more appealing. But as for the mechanics of these stat systems, I know there does come a point where you should acknowledge that you just aren't interested in something rather than it being bad. But it seems like this model of single-player action games, ones with bloated menus that overcomplicate the experience, have been getting rejected by the audience a lot lately. When done right, you could have something like modern God of War, which I thought offered depth in the crafting if you were into that sort of thing, but it was also very simple to do basic upgrades to your weapons and get through the game just fine. When done like this, it's too confusing to find fun. You level up, which allows you to get new abilities, but not like how the Arkham games let you upgrade to get more moves. Here you upgrade things like increase the chance of a critical hit from 15% to 25%. It's just very difficult to get invested in a game where upgrading involves this many different menus and all the effects they have are negligible. When you look past the combat mechanics, the content of the game leaves a lot to be desired. You pick your character of choice and go on nightly patrols in the Bat Cycle, but the world is just not as fun to play in as Arkham Knight. Visually, Gotham looked more impressive in that relatively early PS4 game, rich and detailed from end to end. The cape physics were downright lifelike, each area looked pretty distinct too. But Gotham Knights, while looking fine, it just does not capture the imagination like Arkham Knight did. I do think the game looks fine in terms of lighting and detail on the character models and such. It even ran at a consistent 60 FPS on my PC at 1440p resolution with medium settings, and besides the hair textures, I thought it looked fine. But Arkham Knight was a game you could tell was pushing the PS4 and Xbox One to their limits. You could tell Arkham City was doing that for the PS3 and the Xbox 360. Having played PS5 games that are much more impressive than this, it just makes the game look pretty mid, especially since it got cancelled on last-gen systems. And like I said, it's evident that this wasn't exactly a high-profile release from Warner Bros., but I think that's just very disappointing to see. Much of Gotham is foggy and dark, so there isn't much of the scenery you want to take in. The world is massive in this game, which just means that you'll be commuting from area to area often. Fast travel having to be unlocked with a side mission in every part of the map. It's in that way that Gotham Knights reminds me of Arkham Origins the most. Both games have huge maps that can be a pain to get around and don't stick in your mind much, so they added fast travel for convenience. Only Gotham Knights is worse because it's not partially reusing anything from Arkham City like Arkham Origins had done. This whole map just made me want to give props to Arkham Knight because that was a huge map where the game designers made traversal in the Batmobile and ejecting into a glide so quick and fun that you'd never even think of fast travel. Credit to Gotham Knights for actually including civilians in the city alongside criminals. No Arkham game had ever done that, but the trade-off is that the Bat Cycle can't just barrel through public property at 300 miles an hour like the Batmobile could in Arkham Knight. In many ways, Gotham Knights served as a rehabilitation campaign for the reputation of Arkham Knight, like that game had done for Arkham Origins before it. And traversal is just one of the ways Gotham Knights makes you really miss Arkham Knight, a game I was continuing to play on the side while working on this video. Gotham Knights makes everything into busy work. I just mentioned how gliding after ejecting from the Batmobile was so simple and fun, but in Gotham Knights you have to unlock gliding by beating up 5 heavy enemies in the Freak Gang by stopping their crimes as you find them in the city. And to make it worse, you have to unlock gliding for every character. Before, you just grapple up buildings and fall until you grapple onto another one or just drive from place to place. Having gliding is just such an open world Batman staple set by the Arkham series that I'm not sure why you'd lock it behind busy work. Even then, Batgirl is the only character who can glide like Batman could in the Arkham games. As in, being able to nosedive and then glide back up in the air, which made Batgirl easily the best character to travel as. Not that it's ever as fun as what you could do in an Arkham game, of course, but still. Main quests and side quests are often padded out with busy work too, like how main quests will be unplayable until you complete a certain number of interrogations. Genuinely, there was a part where the Knights needed to protect a judge from the Court of Owls to get a warrant for their leader's arrest. To find this judge, you first have to locate a crime involving the mob and interrogate the last man standing, only for him to tell you to ask the Regulators gang. Repeat the process for them to tell you to find the Freaks gang, and then you'll be able to complete the mission. That, to me, is just dull busy work. Side quests in the Arkham series really weren't anything to write home about, often involving repetitive tasks, but the fact is that the basic mechanics in Arkham City, Origins, and Knight just made their various side quests fun to do in and of themselves. And Gotham Knights is the exact opposite. I was pursuing this Harley Quinn side quest as Robin and found it was room after room of enemies until I had to disarm bombs while facing 2 heavy enemies at once with a lot of health and other goons that would spawn in alongside them. I spent forever on this because the camera made it difficult to focus on the enemies and bombs, and I was prone to taking a lot of damage in the process while not having many health restores left after all the previous enemy waves. That part was so obnoxious I decided I was done with side quests entirely and just went after the main story, which as I said is also loaded up with busy work. But I suppose I shouldn't complain too much about the parts where the combat was frustrating, because other times it was shocking how easy it could be. Just look at how I stun-locked this huge Talon guy as Robin. But this also happened at the very end of the game. Man-Bat creatures are loose in Gotham and I stopped them as Red Hood. The first one wrecked me because it called in for backup and I had to battle like 5 ninjas at once. But I didn't know if you attack the monster from behind, it won't even get the chance to call on assistance. To top it all off, the game is just too long for its own good. With combat this repetitive, stealth mechanics don't have the versatility and maneuverability of the Arkham games, and areas that take this long to get to, it's just not engaging enough to make nearly the 16 hours it took me to beat feel satisfying. You get sick of it pretty fast. And in that case, it's really up to the storyline to save the day. Unfortunately, the plot and writing of the game are also not enough to carry the experience through to the end. Batman being dead and his sidekicks having to band together and protect Gotham is a really compelling premise and isn't something you see that often in major Batman storylines. But there's a lot of untapped potential there. The opening cutscene certainly sells it, as it's a scene that lasts over 10 minutes, showing Batman in his last battle with Ra's al Ghul before the Batcave collapses, and then it introduces you to the playable characters. But the issue is that the story itself from that moment forward isn't that engaging. Full spoiler mode now if you happen to give a damn. The 4 characters fit pretty basic archetypes. Nightwing is the leader thrust into the role before he thinks he's ready for it. Batgirl is the strategist and computer genius. Robin is the youngest and most eager to prove himself as he feels he didn't get the chance when Batman was alive. And Red Hood is the strongest and most hot-headed, though he's still pretty smart in his own way throughout the story. And Alfred's like the grandfather stepping up now that Batman is gone. I actually really like the protagonists of this game and I think their dynamic is endearing. To compare it to the Arkham series again, those games wanted to focus on Batman and his emotional issues that led him to put people at arm's length that created a gap between him and his allies, despite how much he cared for them. But this one embraces the idea that these costumed heroes are a family. Batman is the father figure to a bunch of orphans who mourn him like a father, and they interact with each other like family. The issue for me was that the plot itself just wasn't that interesting. It's all about how the League of Shadows and the Court of Owls are waging war in Gotham. Ra's is dead, and Talia claims she isn't affiliated with the League anymore, while the Knights try to figure out who runs the Court of Owls and bring them down. But I never felt super invested in this. It's revealed that Bruce's uncle, Jacob Kane, was the leader of the court, but he's somebody I had never heard of before playing this game, and he had like one scene before the reveal, so I can't say that I cared. A story without villains I'm interested in stopping isn't going to carry a 16-hour game that wasn't that fun to begin with. Plus, a lot of moments felt pretty predictable. Like how the game has the nightmare hallucinations scene with each character's worst fears that seems like every modern superhero game is contractually obligated to have in it. And this brings us to the lowest point scene where everyone's arguing about how to get the job done and they band together because they have to stick to Batman's code no matter what. And yada yada yada. You could practically write all the dialogue for a scene like this in your head before having seen it. So when it happens, you're just waiting for it to end so we can return to the game. Like I said, there were a lot of things I liked here, and I can list more of them. I think the casting and voice acting in this is really good. I think it's great how every cutscene has different dialogue from whatever hero you chose to play as, giving the game some replay value if you want to see all of it. And it was interesting to see the Al Ghuls depicted as Arabians like they were in the comics, which most external media does not do. But yeah, I didn't really feel super invested in what was going on one way or another. I can't say an amazing story would have saved this fairly monotonous game from getting a mediocre review, but it could have helped. But since it was pretty by the numbers, it just made me feel more tuned out of the game as I decided to zero in on the main story by the end. When I got to about level 16, I noticed my attacks felt more powerful and I was able to equip much more powerful weapons, but still, I was just beating up enemies by mashing buttons, so it didn't really save the game either. Least of all in the final mission where I was just gunning for the final boss, which seemed merciful at first as you have to fight Batman who's back from the Lazarus Pit. This boss was kinda easy, but then you battle a 2-phase Talia al Ghul fight which completely kicked my ass because the timing on dodging her sword swings was really precise. But to the game's credit, I was very surprised by the ending. I'm confident everyone who bought this game knew from moment one that Batman would end up being alive at the end, assuming the YouTube thumbnails didn't spoil you on that before you played the game like what happened to me. But what I absolutely did not expect was how upon being brought back, Batman does sacrifice himself to make sure this new Lazarus Pit can't be used and leaves Gotham in the capable hands of his sidekicks. Each character getting their own ending as they vow to destroy the court for good. I don't know if they ever planned on this getting a sequel or not, but I have to say I respect the fact that the writers didn't chicken out of the premise and have everything go back to normal at the end. But it's not like that mattered too much for me at the end of the day. I was still checked out of the game and ready for it to end by the time it finally did. Where I then concluded, it's not like I hate this game or anything, I just didn't really care for it. Games like Gotham Knights make me sad more than anything else. The reason I say that is because it's one of those games that I can see by watching the behind the scenes footage that the people involved had a specific vision for it and it just didn't jive with me. Gotham Knights was marketed as a co-op game, and as someone who doesn't know anyone who owns this game, I just played the single player and found the game to be what I said. It's too long, repetitive, and not that much fun to play. In my experience at least, it's a finished game where you can get from start to finish without major technical issues, and it has decent production values, but I just don't think anything could save a repetitive core gameplay loop, and that's just where I stand with this game. The critics and their largely mediocre scores seem to agree with me, as does the audience scores, which also skewed negatively. This video, and many pieces covering Gotham Knights, frequently compared it to the Batman Arkham franchise, which I get seems unfair since the game was never intended to be part of that franchise from the very beginning. However, I think it becomes fair because the Arkham games have just set the standard for Batman gameplay, and something newer that is not just different, but also not as good, will inevitably be compared to the games that were significantly more fun. It would be like if we got a Spider-Man game that wasn't from Insomniac and it played like Spider-Man the movie game from PS2 or something. Different series, sure, but the bar is set where it is now, and games coming after will be compared to it, which sums up Gotham Knights pretty well. But having said that, I don't have much else to add on Gotham Knights. I guess it's a shame that this little Batman game retrospective didn't go out on a higher note, but that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. So to close, I'll just say what I always do. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.